A heartbroken travel writer arrives in Paris, planning to forget love forever. But the city has other plans, starting with a spilled coffee, a stranger's laughter, and a storm that rewrites fate. Meet Ella Dubois, a French-American travel writer, who's just ended a toxic engagement in New York. She retreats to her mother's hometown in Montmartre, Paris, to start over. But healing isn't as romantic as the city around her until she meets Hugo, a charming Tessier with a painful past of his own. It was the kind of Paris rain that felt like music, soft, steady and patient. I stepped off the train at Gare du Nord, dragging my suitcase like a second heart I didn't want to carry. It thumped over cobblestones, my boots soaking in cold puddles of unfamiliar streets. Paris was meant to be beautiful, romantic, healing, but I wasn't here for romance. I was here to forget it. 3 weeks ago, I ended an engagement with the man I thought I'd spend forever with. He proposed in front of the Eiffel Tower 2 years ago. Fitting that I'd return to this city without him, feeling more lost than ever. My mother once told me that Montmartre was a place where painters came to find their muse and lovers came to get lost. I was neither a painter nor a lover now, just a woman trying to piece herself together one breath at a time. I ducked into a corner, my trench coat dripping. The scent of espresso wrapped around me like a hug. It was warm, quaint, like a scene from an old French film, and then he walked out from the kitchen, flour-dusted apron, tousled brown hair, sharp jaw softened by a boyish grin, and eyes. God, his eyes. They were grey like Paris rain, but when they landed on mine, I felt seen. Bonjour, he said, nodding politely. You look like you fought the storm. I managed a tired smile. I lost, he chuckled. Coffee? Yes, please. Anything hot? He turned, and I watched him work. His hands moved with a kind of rhythm, graceful, assured. When he returned with a café, he set it down gently, as if even the cup deserved respect. I lifted it to my lips. Warmth, bitterness, peace. This is the best coffee I've ever had, I whispered. Then you've had a tragic coffee life, he grinned. I'm Hugo. I own this little mess. I replied. I'm just passing through. Everyone says that, he said, with a wink, but Paris has a way of keeping the good ones. They say the best way to see Paris is on foot, but with Hugo as my guide, I didn't just see the city. I began to feel it again. We started small. He took me to Rue des Martyrs, a street brimming with flower stalls and fromageries that smelled like history. He walked beside me, never in front, never behind, just with me, like we'd always been walking together. And maybe we had, in some other life. Most tourists head straight to the Eiffel Tower, he said one morning, handing me a warm pain au chocolat as we strolled past Sacre. But I think the real magic is in the quiet corners, the ones that don't ask to be photographed. I bit into the pastry. Buttery, flaky, perfect. Then I guess you're my unofficial tour guide now, he grinned. Only if you're paying in compliments and curiosity. I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in weeks. Something about Hugo made laughter feel like it belonged to me again. Days turned into weeks. He showed me the poetry on the walls of Rue de la Huquette, the accordion players in Saint-Germain, and the boatmen who sang to the Seine under moonlight. In return, I told him about my job as a travel writer, how I was supposed to be documenting this trip, but hadn't written a word since arriving. Why not? He asked one evening as we shared a bottle of red wine on the rooftop of his apartment. Because everything I wrote used to be about him, I admitted. And now, I don't know who I'm writing for anymore. He didn't speak right away. Instead, He reached over, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His fingers lingered for just a second too long. Then maybe, he said, it's time to write for yourself, but nothing gold stays. One morning, I passed a boutique window and froze. Inside stood a woman with high cheekbones, a long navy coat, and familiar eyes I couldn't place until she stepped out and hugged Hugo on the street. I ducked behind a fruit stand, heart pounding. I didn't even know why I was hiding, but then I saw it. The stiffness in his body. The way he pulled back just slightly. A polite smile. Not love but pain. Old, well-worn pain. That night, I didn't ask. And he didn't bring it up. But something had shifted. A few days later, as we sat in his CAF watching the rain blur the glass, I finally said it out loud. She's back, isn't she? Hugo looked up, his eyes tired. So you saw her? I wasn't spying. Just surprised. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Her name is Camille. We were engaged 5 years ago. Silence hung between us. She left a week before the wedding, he continued. No warning. Just a note. Said she didn't want to be a baker's wife. Wow, I whispered. Yeah, he chuckled bitterly. My therapist calls it abandonment trauma. I call it a Tuesday in Paris. I wanted to reach across the table, to hold his hand, to tell him I knew that kind of hollow ache. But instead, I said, so what happens now? He looked at me, rain reflecting in his irises like storms. I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my rented balcony, watching Montmartre glimmer under moonlight. I thought about Hugo, about Camille, about my own ex-Ben, and how he used to whisper promises in the dark that meant nothing in the daylight. I came to Paris to forget. But the past, it follows. Especially in a city that remembers everything. I stayed away from the CF for 3 days. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know how to be near Hugo without feeling like a placeholder in someone else's unwritten chapter. I wandered the cobbled streets of Paris aimlessly, notebook in hand, still unwritten. I watched couples share pastries and kisses. I listened to music spill out of open windows. But nothing moved me to write. Until the 4th morning, I passed the CAF again. The bell above the door jingled like it missed me. There he was, Hugo, behind the counter, piping cream into Claire's. The moment he looked up, our eyes met and his face softened. Like maybe he'd been waiting for me. Like maybe he had words stuck in his throat too. I sat at my usual spot. Without asking, he placed a fresh croissant in front of me. Flaky, golden, still warm. He slid into the seat across from me. No apron, just a man and his pain, sitting with a woman and hers. I missed you, he said. 3 words. Not romantic, not possessive, just honest. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I missed your croissants, he smiled. They missed you too. They've been deflating without your approval. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was safe. Because we were building something fragile here, and maybe laughter was the glow. Later that day, he invited me into the kitchen. Want to learn the secret? He asked, holding out a bowl of flour. To what? To happiness, he said with a wink. It starts with butter. And so I learned how to fold dough with freezing fingers and warm intentions. How to roll croissants until they curled like sleeping cats. How to laugh when the flour puffed into my nose and I sneezed on his apron. Now you've cursed the batch, he teased. They'll taste like heartbreak. I replied. No, he said. They'll taste like healing. That night, after the last customer left, We sat on the rooftop again. Our legs dangled over the edge, a bottle of ROS between us. I found her letter once, Hugo said suddenly. Camille's. He nodded. I burned it. Thought it would free me, did it? No, but it made space for something new. I looked at him. The glow of the Eiffel Tower flickered in his pupils. He leaned in slow, tentative, and I let him. Our lips met. Like the rain on old rooftops, soft, hesitant, familiar in ways neither of us expected. But the second it ended, we both looked away, because the past wasn't gone. Not yet. The next day, a rumor spread. I overheard it at the bakery from a tourist who recognized Camille from some French reality show. She's filming a new documentary, they said, about lost love and finding yourself again, and apparently, Hugo is going to be in it. I felt the burn in my chest like scorched sugar. That night, I asked him, "Are you doing it? The documentary?" He hesitated. "Too long?" she asked. He said it's closure. I laughed bitterly. Closure for her? Or for you? He looked at me like I'd struck something soft. I don't know, he whispered. That's when I knew he wasn't over her. Not completely. And maybe I wasn't over myself either. That night, I wrote my first sentence in weeks. Some love stories aren't about endings. They're about the people we meet before we're ready. The next morning, Paris felt colder, not because the weather had changed, but because I had. There's a quiet kind of heartbreak that comes when you realize you're not competing with a person, but with a memory. Hugo's heart wasn't a closed door. It was an open window still haunted by the breeze of someone long gone, someone who might just return. I started packing that night. The job offer from Rome had been sitting in my inbox for weeks, unanswered. A food and culture column, an apartment near Trastevere, and a publisher who wanted more than just postcards of pain. They wanted joy, color. A writer who had something to say. I didn't feel like that writer. Not yet. But maybe I could become her. I stood in Hugo's kitchen one last time, fingers resting on the marble counter where we had rolled dough and shared quiet glances. The same counter where he kissed me once and then let me drift back into silence. When he walked in, apron dusted in flour, I turned to face him. "I'm leaving," I said. "Rome?" His lips parted slightly. "For how long?" "Indefinitely." A pause. He didn't stop me. He didn't ask me to stay. He just nodded and said, "That's good. You should go." And that was the moment I knew this wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because love doesn't stand still while the person you care about walks away. I spent my last day in Montmartre retracing my steps. The art stalls at Place du Tertre. The hidden bookstore on Rue Lamarck. The cobblestone alley where I spilled my first coffee and met the man who taught me how to fold croissants and smile again. It all felt different now. Like I was walking through a dream I'd already woken up from. Then I saw him, Hugo. He was on the same bench where we first watched the rain together. He held something in his hands, a small, leather-bound notebook. My breath caught. He hadn't seen me yet. I turned and walked away. I didn't want another almost. That night, I lit a candle in my apartment and reread the message from the Rome publisher. "We believe in stories that make people feel less alone." Do you have a story like that? I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop, and then I began to write. A week later, I boarded a train for Italy. As the landscape blurred by, I thought of Paris. Not just the buildings or the pastries or the cafes, but the version of me that city had cradled. A broken girl with a pen in one hand and a scarred heart in the other. and a boy with flour-stained hands and unfinished letters in his drawer. Back in Paris, Hugo stood behind the CAF counter, serving customers with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. After the last table was cleared, he walked upstairs, opened the box on his nightstand, and pulled out the notebook he never meant for anyone to see. Letters, pages of them, not to Camille. To LA. He opened to the last one, the one he wrote after I walked away. LA. There are people who come into your life quietly, like spring rain, and change everything without asking for anything back. You were that for me. But I let you go because I didn't know how to hold on without hurting you. If I ever find the courage, I'll come find you. But if not, know this: some love stories don't need an ending. They just need to be written. Rome was loud, alive, sun-washed, everything Paris wasn't, and everything I thought I needed. I rented a small flat near the Tiber River. The walls were yellow. The window opened to the clinking of wine glasses and the chatter of mopeds flying past lovers in alleyways. But somehow, even in all this beauty, my heart walked slower than the city. I spent mornings writing and afternoons walking through markets that smelled of tomatoes and basil. Strangers laughed like they'd never been broken. I envied them. My editor called to praise the drafts I'd submitted. They're tender, she said. They feel lived in. I nodded and thanked her. But the truth was I hadn't written about Rome at all. I had written about Hugo and croissants and the sound of rain tapping glass while someone you care about slices strawberries in a quiet kitchen. Then one day, an envelope arrived at my doorstep. There was no return address, just my name, in thick black ink. LA. I opened it slowly. Inside were pages, torn from a leather notebook, each one carefully folded. Some had coffee stains. One smelled faintly like cinnamon. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Hugo's. He had written them all to me. Letters never sent. Words stitched together like patchwork quilts, pieced from the crumbs of our brief time together. The first one dated back to the week we met. You walked into my CAF like a storm that didn't apologize. I knew right then that you were more than just a tourist. You were a story I hadn't read yet. Another, dated the night after our first kiss. I think I ruined it. I think I kissed you too soon. Or maybe too late. But that kiss made the world quiet for a second. And the last page, newer than the others, made my hands shake. You said you were leaving. And I let you. Not because I didn't care, but because I was scared that loving you would mean destroying what we had. I hope Rome is kind to you. But I hope, selfishly, that Paris whispers me into your dreams sometimes. If you ever want to come back, there's flour on the counter. And your cup still waits by the window. I read them all again that night. Each word felt like a breadcrumb, leading me back not just to Hugo, but to myself. I didn't pack right away. I didn't book a train. I didn't rush, because for the first time, I realized something. Healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means remembering without breaking, but I also knew this. I had to see him. Not for closure, not even for love, but for truth, because maybe, just maybe, we were no longer running from our pasts. Maybe we were walking toward our future. I didn't tell him I was coming. I took the early morning train from Termini station in Rome and watched the sun rise through dusty windows. I held Hugo's letters close to my chest like they might warm me, like they might anchor me if my resolve wavered. As the train curved past fields of sunflowers and sleepy villages, I thought about all the things I wanted to say to him. But most of all, I thought about the silence that had existed between us, not angry or resentful, just aching, unfinished. But by the time I reached Gare de Lyon in Paris, the sky was the color of lavender tea. I didn't go straight to the CAF. I needed to walk the city a little, let the streets remind me of why I once fell in love with the way it breathed. Montmartre greeted me like a friend who never asks questions. The cobblestones still remembered my steps. The florist on the corner still sold the same peonies. A violinist still played beneath the stone stairs that led to a Sacré-Cœur. But when I stood across the street from Hugo's CAF, I froze, because it wasn't just Hugo behind the counter. It was Camille. She stood beside him, laughing, her hand grazing his wrist as she leaned in to say something. The air left my lungs so fast I nearly forgot I was supposed to breathe. I didn't go in. Not then. I turned and walked away. I ended up sitting on the rooftop of my old Airbnb, watching the city fade into gold. The Eiffel Tower glittered in the distance, too far away to reach, too close to ignore. I hated that I felt this way. I hated that my first instinct was to assume the worst. But then I reminded myself, that's what unhealed people do. And I wasn't unhealed anymore. Not fully, but enough to catch myself before spiraling. I needed clarity, not assumptions. So I wrote a letter of my own. Hugo, I came back to Paris for answers. But maybe I already had them. Your words found me. They found the girl who ran away from love because she didn't think she deserved to be chosen. And maybe that girl still lives in me somewhere, but she's quieter now. I'm not asking for promises or forever. I just want to know one thing. Do you still have my cup by the window? I slipped the note under the CAF's door late that night. Then I waited. I checked into a small guest house 2 streets away and tried not to count the hours. I told myself I would give it 3 days. If I didn't hear back, I'd leave. Again. This time with dignity. But the very next morning, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find no one there. Just a plain paper bag. Inside, a croissant. Still warm, my favorite, and a small handwritten note tucked beneath it. The cup never moved. Neither did my heart. My hands trembled as I held his note. The cup never moved. Neither did my heart. There it was. The answer I didn't know I still needed. Not in grand declarations or elaborate gestures, but in quiet truths, folded between flaky pastry and ink. I stood there, barefoot on the threshold of my rented room, a croissant warming my palm and his words pressing into my soul. My heart, no longer afraid, whispered what I'd refused to hear before. I still loved him, and maybe I always had. From the very first coffee in the rain, from the first moment I saw pain behind his grin and chose to stay anyway. I didn't even brush my hair. I slipped on my coat, grabbed the paper bag with the croissant, and ran. Down winding alleys, past street vendors setting up morning crates of strawberries and fresh baguettes. The sky was just beginning to blush, the sleepy city still yawning into light. My boots splashed through a shallow puddle on Rue des Abbesses. It was raining again. Of course it was. Because Paris and we had an understanding. Our stories always started in the rain. I spotted the CAF, but Hugo wasn't inside. The lights were off. I turned in a slow circle, panic blooming fast. What if I'd waited too long again? Then I heard it. I turned. There he was, standing on the stairs of the Abbesses metro entrance, holding an umbrella and looking at me like I was the only person he'd ever waited for. I walked, then jogged, then ran, right into him. The umbrella tilted, letting the rain hit us both. His other hand found mine. Camille came by to say goodbye, he said. She was moving to London. That was it, I nodded. I believed him. More than that, I felt it. In the way he looked at me like I was a second sunrise. Not a maybe. Not a rebound. Just me. He cupped my face, water dripping from his lashes. You wrote about the girl who smiles when it rains, I whispered. His forehead leaned against mine. I wrote about the woman I couldn't forget and then finally be kissed. Not like last time. Not afraid. Not uncertain. This time it was real. It tasted like every unwritten page of our story. Like forgiveness and courage. Like croissants and cinnamon. Like coming home. We walked back to the CF together. His fingers intertwined with mine like we'd been practicing this moment in our sleep for years. When we stepped inside, he turned the sign to firm. Then, without a word, he brewed 2 coffees. We sat by the window. My cup was still there, waiting. He slid it to me with a smile. I shipped. Still perfect. Still warm. Just like us. The next few weeks passed in slow, golden hours. There were no grand events. No dramatic twists, just ordinary moments made extraordinary because they were ours. We woke up to the smell of fresh baguettes and the soft clink of porcelain. We watched sunsets from the rooftop, wrapped in the same blanket, counting the stars between laughter. He taught me how to perfect a caramel glaze. I taught him how to write his first blog post for the CAF's website, The Poetry of Butter. And somehow, in all that softness, we healed. One Sunday morning, Hugo placed a flower-covered envelope on my breakfast plate. Inside was a small card. For the girl who wrote herself home. Will you see or author the next chapter with me? He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't need to. Because I already had. But love, I learned, doesn't erase the past. One rainy evening, I found myself in Hugo's attic, digging through old boxes for CAF decorations. That's when I saw it, a faded photo tucked in a dusty notebook. Hugo and Camille, smiling in front of the CAF, her hand resting on his chest, and my heart did a small, stupid somersault. I didn't bring it up that night. I sat with the feeling instead. Let it breathe. Let it sting. Until the next morning, when Hugo noticed my quietness as I stirred sugar into my coffee. What's going on in that writer's head? He asked, crouching beside my chair. I handed him the photo. He looked at it for a long time. Then, without hesitation, he folded it once and placed it in the recycling bin. She was a chapter, he said gently. You're the story. And just like that, the ache was gone. A few days later, something strange happened. I got an email from my publisher in Rome. They loved my Paris pieces so much, they wanted a full memoir. A cross between a travelogue and a love letter, my editor said. Call it what you want. But you've got something special here. My first instinct was to tell my story. Our story meant exposing the most tender parts of myself, of Hugo, of us. But then I remembered the first night I met him, how he placed a coffee on the table like it was a peace offering to the world. I sat down at my laptop, and I wrote, Paris After the Rain. That was the title. A story of a girl who came to forget love and found someone who helped her remember herself first. A story about grief and slow healing and buttery mornings. A story about a CAF, a croissant, and a man who never moved her coffee cup because, somehow, he always knew she'd return. One night, after I finished the last page, I read the entire thing aloud to Hugo as we sat in his quiet kitchen. When I finished, he didn't say a word. He just stood up, kissed my forehead, and said, "You didn't just write our story. You honored it." And that's when I realized something. Love doesn't always rush in like a hurricane. Sometimes it rises slowly, like dough in the early hours of the morning, soft, steady, certain. I once believed the healing would look like forgetting. Then, forgetting the broken promises. Forgetting the ache I carried in every sentence I wrote, in every cup of coffee I drank alone. But now I know. Healing doesn't mean erasing the pain. It means learning to breathe alongside it. To find beauty in quiet mornings and freshly brewed espresso. To laugh with someone who listens, not to fix you, but to understand you. To write words not to fill silence but to honor it. It's spring in Montmartre now. The rain still comes softly, sometimes fiercely. But now I don't hide from it. I walk with it. Hugo and I live in a small apartment above the CAF. The rooftop is still ours. We planted herbs in small pots: basil, thyme, lavender. Our basil is thriving. Our lavender not so much. He jokes that I talk too much and scare the plants. He still makes croissants every morning. I still write. Sometimes I write about Rome. Sometimes about Paris. But most of the time, I write about us, not in a fairy tale way. In a real way, messy, beautiful, layered like the pastry he folds with such care. A few weeks ago, my book was published, Paris After the Rain. We had a launch event at the CAF. Hugo made heart-shaped croissants, even though he said they were ridiculous and impractical. We hung fairy lights in the windows. My mother sent me lilies. Hugo's father flew in from Marseille and cried during my reading. When I finished reading the last page aloud, there was a moment of silence. And then, thunderous applause, not just for me, for the story, for the love it represented, for the truth it dared to tell. That night, back on the rooftop, Hugo pulled something from his pocket. Not a ring, not yet, just a slip of paper. One of the old letters he never sent me. He handed it to me with a bashful smile. I couldn't let this one go. I unfolded it slowly. Dear LA, there are thousands of CAFs in Paris, but the day you walked into mine, it became the only one that mattered. You smiled like the city had already forgiven me, and I think I've been falling ever since. I looked at him. No words came. So I kissed him, softly, slowly, like gratitude, like home. And now, every morning, I sit by the same CAF window with the same cup, and I write, not for a deadline, not for revenge, not even for healing anymore. I write because I'm in love with the city, with my story, with the man who never moved my cup. They say Paris is for lovers, but I think Paris is for those who survive heartbreak and learn how to fall in love again anyway, even if it starts in the rain, especially if it starts in the rain. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment love so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching from? Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, spread love.